Say my name. I am awake. I am the danger. I am the one who knocks.
All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of Breaking Into Breaking Bad. Well, this is Clifford Humphrey and Caleb Humphrey. We are starting still this episode, this podcast on Breaking Bad, and just wanted to mention once again, sort of like my interest in this was that Breaking Bad seems to me to be a modern view of what are sort of eternal questions of interest for human beings. And I think particularly, I was thinking about this with Gracie this morning, my wife, about why we were doing it. And I think it's because there's something in sort of modern suburban life that is, for lack of a better term, domesticating, right? It's just kind of a good thing, right? It's a thing that helps men, especially, adapt to circumstances of the family, and all those things are good insofar as they encourage responsibility and things that are good for a man and for a family and for a community and civilization on the largest scale. But there's also a downside to domestication where you sort of like tame masculinity, and men kind of become so domesticated that they become kind of feminized in a way, or neutered, you might say, made impotent insofar as their masculine purposes, and so I think where we kind of saw at the beginning of this show was Walter White domesticated to a degree that was not healthy for him or for his family, right? And you can see it in Skylar that she wants Walter to eat the veggie bacon, right? Eat the veggie bacon. But she also wants him to be a man who, doesn't just roll over all the time.
And she
So,
probably did this to no fault of her own. Like she might have kind of got into this role with blindfolders on just like Walter did. And before she
mhm,
knew it, they were in these roles where they did not dream of being. She
yeah,
became kind of like the leader, even though she didn't want to be. And he wanted to be the leader, but he became this, yes, dear, whatever you say, let's do it. Sure, and he just became
right.
this yes man. And he kind of, to your point, he was the farthest from a hunter gatherer type of manly. I need to be able to express my ways of being at
Yeah,
all. Like he couldn't do anything.
right, right. Okay, so that we covered the first episode. So let's with that sort of context again, a sort of like generally speaking, what's of interest for us in this show. Let's take a particular look at episode 2.
Yep.
So this one, this one's called "The Cat's in the Bag." It's not immediately clear to me why it's called that, but maybe it'll come to us as we talk about it. But start off by asking the question: why did the producer and writer want to call this episode "Cats in the Bag"? I guess there's a saying, right? Cats out of the bag. When
Yeah.
what does that mean? What does that mean when you say something? The cat's out of the bag. It sort of means like something's been revealed, right? Like well, cat's out of the bag now. Or maybe it's like when the cat's out of the bag, you can't put it back in, kind of a Pandora's box sort of metaphor. I don't know, but this
Right.
episode, the
Like they
cat
they
is in the
opened
bag.
this door and now they got to deal with whatever came from that door, and that's what
Hmm.
they're stuck with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Okay. Well, if something more comes to us in the midst of the discussion, we'll go. Okay. So you noted that this episode starts off immediately where the previous one left off, right?
Right. Yep.
Another interesting thing is they keep playing with the time warp, right? So we realize at the end of the first episode that we still don't really know what happened in between. Why did it take Walter till 2 a.m. to get back home? When episode 2 starts, does it flash back to how they got the RV back on the road, or is that the next day?
It does flash back, right? So, like, it starts with them, making love, or the first one ends with it, and the second one starts with it, and then it goes back to, like what were they supposed to do type of scenario. And then it could just kind of implied, they took it to Jesse's house, and then Walter's like, I got to go to school,
Right.
handle these two dead guys.
Yeah, but there's a problem right away, right? One of them's not dead.
Right. Yeah. They
Huge
find
problem.
Crazy Eight moaning. and
Right.
and
Right.
and so they're both in like, I don't know what to do. I'm in way over my head. And they both kind of point at each other like, hey, you're the drug dealer, or you're the scientist. Like, you fix this.
Right.
I have my own things to do.
Yeah. And let's remember that the partnership started when Walter approaches Jesse and says, you're going to be my partner or else I'm going to tell on you. Right. So he made him become his partner at the point of a gun, basically. And
True.
so there wasn't, this is a perpetual problem that people talk about, which is how do, pirates, for example, get along and accomplish common purposes, right? If they're going to do injustice together, they still have to have some degree of justice between them in order to trust each other, in order to accomplish the injustice that they're wanting to do, right? But there's a contradiction. There's a contradiction within them. So right now, why should Jesse not, at any chance he try to bolt and leave, right? He's been forced into this situation, and now Walter has owned some of the guilt. So now Walter loses his leverage over Jesse because he can't say, oh, Jesse's a drug dealer, because Jesse's going to say, yeah, well, this guy murdered people. So now there's an inequality. And so now that changed the whole relationship between the two of them. Yeah. Walter no longer has the power.
No, I agree.
So a couple things I noticed when Walter's eating breakfast and Jesse calls and leaves a voicemail.
Pretending to be AT&T.
Yeah, right. Really funny. But we note right off that it's Skylar's voice on the voice machine. So again, that's one other sort of just like really small example of a place where Skylar has exerted leadership to do a thing that had to be done for the home. So she's got she's the one whose voice, represents the whole family to whoever's calling. And so I noticed that really small detail, nothing big, but it's interesting that the writers included it that way. I'm assuming that none of this was accidental, that every little detail was intentional. A big thing that starts to that you see clearly in this episode is that Walter's conscience is functioning properly because it's bothering him a whole lot that they've got this guy who's partially murdered. There's one guy who's dead, and the other one. Are
you talking about they've already done the coin toss, and Walter gets the bad side, right? So
yeah, well, let's go there. So if you so why did they do the coin toss?
Neither one of them wants to kill the guy because
right, but
they'd rather.
Note that it's they try, each of them is sort of like, well, these are both they're equal jobs, like they're both really bad. How about I take this one and you take that one, whatever. But they're both secretly hoping they don't have to do the murder.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's a pretty horrible job to dispose of a body, right? Like that's pretty gross.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no winning in either option, but one is obviously less. Like if I'm in that scenario, I would, if I had to be in that scenario, I would rather dispose of the body than have to kill the person and then still have to dispose of the body.
Right. So you could look at it that way, where it's the same job plus a little bit more. But I think you also have to think about it this way: dealing with Emilio's body as a purely material, physical thing, right? In a
Because
way.
actually, oh yeah, okay, yep,
Whereas the murder, that involves like the
a person.
will and the intention and the act, right? That you could say affects your soul. Now,
Yep,
now Walter's already done the deed, but remember when he did that before, it was kind of self-defense.
it was. It was 100%.
So
He was literally
yeah,
held at gunpoint and
the
was
guy
like,
held a gun to his yeah. So
yeah,
in the grand scheme of the moral universe, he was justified
right.
in poisoning those
That
guys.
one
But
I feel like
now,
anyone could rationalize for sure.
yeah,
You
sure,
know,
sure. But now that same moral universe would require him to take this guy to a hospital to try and save him. And
yep.
and 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 Walter can't do that. But the coin toss, right, which he loses, and that means he has to kill Emilio or
Yep.
Crazy Eight. Uh, it's wearing on him a whole lot, and it's funny. Jesse can sympathize and be like, so like, kind of sucks that you got that coin toss that way. Have you done it yet? Like Jesse knows that's a really heavy load. He got the raw end of the deal,
Yeah.
but to the other side, like for Jesse, I noticed when he kind of puts it off a little bit too, and he's not looking forward to it. But that when he eventually works himself up enough to taking care of Emilio's body, he has to get high first,
Hmm.
and then he tells
Yeah.
himself, what does he say? What does he
He
say? He
says
says,
just meat.
just meat, right? He has to
Yep.
tell
He
himself that there's nothing
human
different
about this
about
person anymore. He
human. That's the word. Yeah.
dehumanizes him for sure.
Yeah. Just meat, just a bunch of meat. Yeah. And I know. So like, in a way, he's having to justify to himself this horrible thing. It's interesting to me, though, that very justification underneath all that assumes a morality. He knows he knows that you're not supposed to treat a human being like that. You're supposed to treat even a human being's corpse with some degree of respect, right?
Right.
And so he doesn't, but he admits that when he says it's just meat, it's just meat. He doesn't say this is a human being, but you know what? I don't care. I'm just going to do this to a human being. He tries to convince himself it's not a human being. So there again, Jesse's conscience is working too.
Right.
It's sort of bearing witness to the fact you're doing something you shouldn't do.
Yeah, I mean, you do learn a little bit more about Jesse in this episode, not by a lot of what he says, but like you said, but by his actions, because you realize that even though when you first see him, you're like, oh, this is a drug dealer that just got lucky, was in the neighbor's house, he's got away. He actually doesn't come across in this episode like, okay, this guy is just a bad thug. Like you don't get that. He even calls Walter White, Mr. White, like he has these tendencies of some level of goodness in him. Or and maybe it's not the word goodness, but he has some level of you could tell that he was brought up in a certain way and he is kind of almost turned to this, he's by the choices he made or lack of choices that Walter's made. But you're right, there's definitely a conscience in him, and it's funny because he got high and Walter got high, which is a
Right.
completely different
Right, right,
scenario with
right, right,
Walter.
right. Because you expect Jesse to get high. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
But
what he does.
but 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 it's interesting, and we're going to see how this plays out, obviously, with the rest of the show. But they're both resorting to chemicals
Hmm.
in order to try to silence their conscience or escape from that, right? Or to what's the word? Like drown it out. I mean, obviously, chemistry plays a big role in this entire show, but here we have, there's a battle between the physical and the spiritual, right? The moral and the material, and chemistry is a kind of interplay between both of those things throughout the show, right? It's because of the meth, the drug, that 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 Walter starts to make choices, moral choices that affect his soul, right?
Hmm.
And here, this one little act, they're both using chemicals to try to quiet their conscience so that they can go forward with the act that they're willing. So anyway, okay, I think we've said enough about that. What else about this particular episode?
Well, I mean, like obviously, like you you know, they're both procrastinating in a way. You know, Jesse goes off and he tries to uh well, no, Walter tells him to get the, go get the plastic tub. And he's like, okay, and then he goes to a store and he can't find a tub big enough, and he even tries to like sit in the tub to see if it would
Yep.
actually hold his body,
Yep.
and and then it gets rid of that, and he shows Jesse showing back up at the house, and Walter's just sitting there high as a kite, and Jesse's like, oh, you did it. And he's like, no, and then Walter doesn't even respond. You just hear Crazy Eight moaning down in the
Right,
basement.
right.
And he's like, "Yo, you still haven't done it, Mr. White. Come on."
Well, so one thing I thought was interesting. Walter, when they realize that Crazy Eight is fully functioning and like basically recovered, he tells Jesse, "Why don't you go down there and reason with him and see if you can get him to make a deal with
Yeah.
him." And Jesse knows that's crazy, right? And it goes back to that problem about pirates, right? Is that guy's a pirate too. You don't operate and say, well, look, we'll do this thing if you promise to do this. He's a pirate. Why would they keep their word? They live by doing injustice. So
Yep.
you don't take the word of a pirate, right? You don't take the word of a drug dealer. He's only in it insofar as his interest is there, right? But here's the thing: Walter thinks of Crazy Eight as a rational actor.
Right.
In other words, he's only going to do the thing that makes sense for him, right? As if he were some sort of robot that had a computer program where, if you always do this, you input, you always get that output. But Crazy Eight is not a robot. He's a human being,
Right.
which means that he's motivated by things like resentment, things that make humans not act rationally all the time. And it's so he's naive to think that, oh yeah, well, we'll just make this guy a deal and it'll be in his interest, and he'll rationally make that choice, and he'll let us go, and he won't try and off us later. And Jesse knows that's crazy because he's worked in the world of drug dealing, and he knows, look, no, you don't cross certain people because there are things on the line, like reputations, and that, like, your reputation as a drug dealer is huge, right? People have to trust you and all of that. But that relates to Walter, because Walter views himself as just a rational actor. I'm just making meth to get money to give to my family, and that's a rational choice, and it makes sense, and that's all I'm doing. I'm not like trying to make a name for myself. I'm not out there trying to become a hero or like pursue some glorious thing. I'm just making a rational, choice, given the fact that I've got this cancer diagnosis. I'm not going to live much longer. I know a lot about chemistry. I can make good meth. I'm just a rational actor, and I'm going to make this choice. And of course, Walter's naive about himself. He doesn't see that actually there are other things that are seeping into his motive all the time.
Right. But he's also, and see, this is the part where I really like where Vince Gilligan got the writing, and obviously Bryan Cranston with the actor playing Walter, is that you took somebody that was just a nonchalant guy, and then you gave him this crazy, like, boom, you're going to die in 6 months. And then he makes a crazy choice, and now he's acting like he's never acted before. And he's also the biggest amateur when it comes to doing anything against the law. So, like, you talking about 5 different things that are happening all at once, and he doesn't know how to, like, you try to think of how you would react in a scenario like this. Like, say you're a guy that's never done anything at all against the law, and then you find yourself just doing all sorts of like crazy things like that. And he's responding in a way that I feel like is so real for somebody that's never done a bad thing in their life. And that's another part I really like the show, because it's not fake. It's not like he just all of a sudden is this Rocky Balboa, I'm the best at it all. Like he sucks at this. Like there were so many angles that he did not see happen. He just
Yeah.
trusted so much that Jesse would do this part and he would do this part and everything would work out right. Like you said, very rational. If you do 1 + 1 is 2, therefore it's good.
Yeah.
Like he
Right.
didn't think about any kind of, what ifs at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
seeing it play out in this episode.
Yeah. There's a great book I think about a lot, and things like this by Dostoevsky called Notes from Underground. And it's a real short book, but it's the story of this sort of resentful bureaucrat who doesn't operate according to rational purposes, and it's a great insight into the human psyche and the human condition, where we do things against our own interest to spite someone else, right? Like, oh, my wife's pestering me about taking this medicine. Well, I'm so, angry at her for doing that. I'm not going to take the medicine. It's going to kill me, but you know what? It's going to really hurt her, right? That kind of thinking, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's such a human way of being, right? Totally not rational, but that's how we are, right? And Dostoevsky really brings that out. And I think that we, in a way, Walter's a kind of Dostoevskian character, eventually, right, where you see the rest of the show goes. But right now, he's this naive kind of guy that just sort of goes through the motions, and has this assumption of how the world is, and what you see kind of breaking down slowly is his view of how everything's supposed to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for so long he's just sort of rolled over and trusted, well, everything's going to be fine. This isn't going my way, but everything's going to be fine. This isn't going my way, but everything's going to be fine. Okay, so we get this great scene in the hospital room.
Yep.
Where Skylar is getting
annual checkup. Well, not annual checkup, but
no,
baby checkup.
sonogram, right?
Yep.
And they're looking at the baby, and they're going to learn the sex of the baby, and it's super exciting. And of course, Walter has just left Jesse's house. I'm honestly very surprised that she doesn't smell marijuana all over him. But
right, yeah.
But anyway, so there he is in the hospital, pretending to be very present and engaged and happy. And we know that he's got this horrible thing on his mind.
Yep.
Wondering, how are we going to kill this one guy and dispose of both his body and the other guy's body? And yet he can still manage to put the face on. So they do that. And then Skylar, we learn a little bit about Skylar, right? She's kind of nosy, right? So when Jesse called, she kind of knew something was fishy with that. She looks into it. She realizes it's not insurance or AT&T, right? It's Jesse Pinkman. And so then she does this kind of weird, like how much research she does. What does that tell you about her?
Well, first she calls back and she gets Jesse's voicemail, which is just like the most ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yo 93821. Leave a tone or something like that. Yeah, it's crazy. And so she looks up. Remember this is 2008, right? So remember what it was like in 2008, the flip phones and everything like that. She looks up. She just Googles Jesse Pinkman and some web page comes up, kind of like a MySpace
that number
or something.
She looks for that number. Yeah.
See the number, right? And that's what pops up, and it's just Jesse, just different crazy pictures, right? And so she learns a little bit about this, and then at the very bottom of the page, it had his like quick bio, like age, name, and high school, and you realize that's the same high school that Walter teaches at, and then she puts it together, like boom, there it is.
Yeah. So yeah, she's probably justified and like when she starts to learn like something's not right here because Walter's such a straight-laced guy, right? Old Walter like would never have any kind of weird thing like this. So so then she confronts him and says, "Hey, who's Jesse Pinkman?" Right? And then he comes up with what I thought was a pretty good excuse, right? Like given the fact that he didn't know how much she knew,
right?
He took I think he took a kind of a middle of the road approach where she says, okay, she probably knows at least this much.
Right.
And
she's
it's
a student.
And it's within the realm of reason that I could have gotten interested in pot. And I thought I hadn't, thought about it. I thought he's probably going to tell her about his diagnosis. He's going to divert her attention away from the Jesse thing
Right.
and say,
Let's change the
well,
subject.
honey, I was waiting for a better moment, but I've got this heavy thing I'm dealing with, so pity me, and that's why I started smoking pot. But he doesn't say that. What does he say? He says, get
Oh,
off my ass.
this is one of my favorite lines in the show. Like
Mm,
of the
mm.
top three lines or whatever, this is one of my favorite ones, and it comes so early on. And he basically just asks her, like, what I need from you is to come down and crawl out of my ass. Would you do that for me, please? I would
Yeah,
really
right,
appreciate it. And he says it
right.
just so like
Matter of fact.
meaningful,
Yeah, yeah,
like I really need this from you. And he hasn't
yeah.
asked anything from her in forever. So that probably caught her off guard. But the fact that he says that to her is she's just dumbfounded. She's like,
Hmm.
she doesn't respond.
Yeah, right, right,
And
right, right.
I love that because it's the first time you see him really take a stand against Skylar in the sense of stop questioning every single thing I'm doing, and just let something play out. Although she was all within her realm of being suspicious.
Of course, of course. Well, and she knew that the old Walter, I think this is important. Old Walter would think smoking marijuana, yeah, probably wrong because it's against the law. Probably stupid because her brother-in-law is a DEA agent.
Yep.
But most of all, I think she would think that the old Walter would think smoking pot is just lame, right? Like only lame people would do that, right?
Right. You're
And so
smarter
and
than
so
this. Why would you do that?
yeah, right, right. So she's completely taken off guard by this Walter, who says, "Yeah, you know what? I've come to the point where I like a joint every now and then, and it's
Hmm.
not a big deal." He's like, "I can do this bad thing, and it's okay, and you have to be all right with that." Okay. Anything else? What I was going to say here,
Um,
I was going to. It's one thing. I think it's funny that they live in New Mexico, and Jesse Pinkman is always wearing like really baggy hoodies and beanies. Like, how is he
I
not
would be dying.
blisteringly hot?
I'd be
Yeah,
sweating so much. It'd be the worst.
I know you would. I know you would. But I mean, I know it's part of his sort of ghetto look, but my gosh,
Right. Yeah, it does
it's
kind of
so
goes
it's
hand in hand
Detroit.
with his
It's
personality and
very Detroit, not New Mexico. Yeah.
the role that he's trying to play.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
yeah, it must have, just from an acting point, it must have been very difficult
Yeah.
to perform.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, one last thought too about the about him smoking pot. Why I thought this was an interesting point in the story is because it's the first he does it right as a way, like he's supposed to be killing Crazy Eight, but he doesn't. He rolls his joint, and in a way, you could say, well, he was just trying to escape and dull his pain or dull the conscience a little bit. But in a way, I thought maybe he's sort of working himself up to. He's taking a baby step toward badness, so that he can then take a larger step and kill this guy. And so he's sort
Right.
of he's in a way that makes sense in a kind of moral way, that like how does someone end up doing something really really bad? Well, they started by taking little choices at a time, and it got them there, right? um
Right. Kind of like what
so when
Jesse would say, you don't just break bad,
right,
like you
right,
take little things to get to where you're going.
so he decides to break bad, but he can't get there right away. He has
Right.
to baby steps toward Breaking
Hmm.
Bad, right? So he rolls the joint. Again, something that he would have thought wrong and stupid, but irrational, right? Like that's irrational. You don't do that. And it's another way of exploding this idea that, oh, well, human beings just act rationally. No, they don't,
Hmm.
right? That's not how human beings are. They're more complex than that. And here we see Walter White, the guy who knows, the dangers of smoking and all that, right? And chemically what it does to your brain. He knows all that,
Yep.
and yet he
And
does it.
then he goes and obviously confronts Skylar, and then I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the next part of the show is you see you see Jesse pulling Emilio out of the RV, and then sure enough, here comes Skylar. Literally, like Emilio's on the ground right behind his car, and she just walks through the gate, and he just freaks out because he doesn't know who
Yeah.
she is. I don't think he ever met Skylar, Mrs.
Right.
White. And remember,
Right.
he's completely all banged up and everything, and so he gets in front of her towards the gate and has her turn around, which I thought was pretty funny, just to get her to look the other way. And oh man, when she says like, Walt told me everything. I know what you were doing, and he's just like, oh no, But like
Right.
the whole
Yeah, it's a
do
brilliant
not
scene.
sell marijuana to my husband.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
beautiful.
Okay. Right. Yeah. No, it's really, really well done. I think it kind of goes back to something you were saying about Jesse. Like when we're thinking through this show, we're wanting to know who is Walter White, and we also want to know who is Jesse Pinkman. And I think
Yep.
Jesse Pinkman, he comes off like a bad gangster, thug, experienced drug dealer, but he's comical in how inept he is.
Mm-hmm.
And really he seems to be more of a innocent kid, like trying to pretend that he's a badass, right?
Right. He's a wannabe.
Yeah, right. Very much so. Very much so. And I think that comes out more and more and more, but we're starting to see it a little bit here that he doesn't really have what it takes to be a really evil person.
You could tell this is all new territory for him, even though he's been dabbling in making and selling meth
Yeah.
with his partners. He's probably always been the number two at most, but he's never really dabbled in this kind of scenario.
Well, we'll keep an eye on Jesse Pinkman and how his character develops, and that with Walter White. But I think these early episodes are crucial because they're the first steps, and there's this the pace is going to quicken, but the direction that we're going in now is very evident because of how much of a departure it is from their old paths. So, all right, well, let's leave it there with episode number 2, unless you got anything else to add.
No, I think everyone's seen it by now, and it was a crazy ending.
Yeah.
But
any greater clarity on the name Cats in the Bag?
No, I think what you said also, cat's out of the bag, as far as they opened the door and now they're dealing with whatever came through the door.
Well, maybe we have to, before we end, talk briefly about the bathtub.
Oh yes.
This was this. I mean, that whole scene is just comical in a really sort of mortifying way. It's what's the word? Macabre. Like it's like disgusting, but you're laughing at how comical it is, and you're thinking, my gosh, how on earth would I like clean that up? Like what is that, right? And in a way, we like Jesse seems to be right. Like Emilio does look like a bunch of meat at that point, and I mean it is gross,
Oh
but
gosh, yeah,
completely dehumanized. And now he's got a hole in his house with blood dripping down, 2 stories. Pretty gross, but it's a mixture of comic relief with like how gross and evil their actions have become, right? So, and stupid,
and also,
right? No.
Also like the whole fact that Walter was the one that told Jesse get the plastic bin, and he didn't explain why. He just said, "Trust me, you just get it." Right. And then he was left to his own thoughts and realized, oh, I don't need that. And then at the very end he goes, he told him like, oh, because acid does not deteriorate in plastic, but it will take care of anything else. So it's just another like Walter White, Mr. White being the teacher, Jesse still being the student, even though that they're quote unquote partners in this. Like he's just another way of putting him at the lower end of their partnership. Like
right.
I am not.
And yet he has to rely on Jesse. And now again, and we'll just make this the last point, I guess. Before all the dirt was on Jesse and Walter White could kind of dip in and dip out. Now there's murder, there's blood on both of their hands, and so now they're linked by a mutual guilt, right? If one goes down, that one, this is the prisoner's dilemma, right? If that one goes down, he could tattle on the other one as a way to sort of get his own sentence lightened, right? So now
Right.
they need each other. They need they want the other one to succeed just as much as as they
Mutual
themselves do,
self-interest.
right? That's right, right. Their mutual trust is their mutual guilt. So, all right, well, that's where we'll leave them, and we'll see what happens in episode 3. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right.